For those of you who were at the earlier session on AI, you may recall I spoke about this trend that's been going on really for 50 or 60 years, but has been evident since the rise of the internet, which is Moore's Law, not so much as a statement about transistors, but a statement about the progress of computational intelligence out across the world, from mainframes to minis and micros to PCs to the client server and then the web and mobility and cloud and the Internet of Things, really touching more and more places with more and more data analysis and computation and communications capabilities. We're in the middle of one of the most exciting phases of that revolution precisely because of cloud computing, this ability to ship your computation where you want it, to work at a very large scale, to deploy lots of stuff through software established systems. It's been evident for some years that it's going to be a big deal. It's still in the process of being built. And what I'd like to ask our panel to talk about in our very brief time is to speak about where we are now, what still needs to be built, who will be the customers and what will be the need, and perhaps even, if we can in our short time, figure out where's the miracle going to be. So why don't you introduce yourself, speak briefly about your company and what you do, and where you think the market is today technically and from a business perspective.
Sure thing. Quentin, thanks for the lead-in. As you mentioned, what we saw, Prabhakar and I, my co-founder, the Fabric, when we left Juniper Networks after the last company that got acquired that we started, was some major trends, which today is rather very self-evident. First is infrastructure is moving to software. Second is this is moving to the cloud. Third is it's being consumed as a service, as like a utility. And fourth is everything is becoming AI-driven in that space. So when you have one disruption, you create multiple companies. When you have such a large, massive disruption, we felt there's an opportunity to create multiple companies in the cloud infrastructure and IoT infrastructure space. So the Fabric was born with a vision that instead of just creating between us, having done multiple startups or 10 startups between us, yet another startup, we felt that we could create multiple companies in that space, given the disruption. And the Fabric was born as a platform to create multiple companies in this cloud infrastructure and IoT infrastructure space.
Well, full disclosure, I do work with Google Cloud, arguably the largest computing system in the world. I'm very open to the idea, but what is the opportunity away from these large companies? What else can you invent? What startups could you invest in?
Sure. Actually, Sanjay is going to speak about VeloCloud. VeloCloud was the very first company that we co-created along with Sanjay at the Fabric. So the way we look at cloud is like an operating system. You have a variety of applications that can be layered on the top of this platform.
Yes.
And not only that, the world is not just going to be one cloud, but it is going to be a multi-cloud world.
Yes.
You're going to have Azure, you've got Amazon, you've got Google, and you've got your own private data center.
Alibaba.
There
are
exactly. So infrastructure elements, let's just take a very trivial example. Let's just say firewall. Firewalls are already on the cloud. Now you'll have to have these firewalls across multiple clouds, the same firewall. You have to have multi-cloud management. You've got the intelligence to be shared among all of these. These are all opportunities. A multi-cloud is an opportunity. Besides that, we're finding that the cloud is moving to the edge. Pankaj at Cisco had coined the term fog computing. Right now, it's called the edge cloud or the edge compute. At Fabric, we see this as a major trend. It's not just a cloud in a centralized location. Rather, it is spread over multiple areas. So again, applications to manage all of these, security at all of these, performance optimizations. These are all variety of different things. That
identifying and managing.
Identifying root cause analysis, all of that.
High-value data.
High-value data, exactly.
Okay. So, further.
Thanks. So my name is Sanjay Uppal, and I used to be the CEO of a company called VeloCloud, which Rajan was an investor in, and so was Pankaj. And now I'm at VMware and doing essentially the same thing, which is running the VeloCloud business at VMware. And I think that we got into this because there's been a lot of movement of IT to the cloud. And there's been movement of compute and applications and storage. But networking, which is a pretty dull and boring subject usually, that hadn't really moved to the cloud, meaning that large companies like Brooks Brothers, who's more interested in selling suits, or La Quinta, who's more interested in selling hotel rooms, or O'Reilly Auto Stores, who's more interested in selling auto parts, than actually managing the specifics and the complexity that's involved in all of the IT, networking IT that's located in each one of their locations. So when you look at a company that has several hundred or thousand locations, then the complexity gets multiplied. And whenever a new application comes in, or a new IoT device or a sensor comes in, then that network needed to have been reconfigured and changed. And that was very, very onerous to do. So there was a complexity reduction proposition that we had, taking something that's pretty dull, like I said, and prosaic like networking, but moving that functionality into the cloud, making it multi-tenant, and I'll explain what that means, and then running it as a service. So the entire idea was, why do companies have to own all of this physical infrastructure at each of their locations? Why don't they just rent it and consume it, and in a really simplified fashion? And so that's what VeloCloud went about doing. And thanks to these two gentlemen and others in the room who were investors of ours, we were able to capture almost 2,000 enterprise customers and 65 carriers or service providers, the likes of AT&T. And with that, we built a business which was recognized by VMware, and now we're a part of VMware. So I think the second part of what you were saying, but where is all this going? I think, in my opinion, where it's going is there's a set of services that you want, whether you're sitting in a branch office or whether you're looking at it from a sensor standpoint. And those sets of services today are pretty defined, and they're location bound. And I think what's going to happen next is, and part of it Rajan was alluding to, is that it's going to get freed from the location. And we already see that in the data center. VMware has a technology called vMotion, where you can move the virtual machines around depending on what service you want. I think that's going to get spread across the entire network. So if you think of it, if you're a sensor, now if you put yourself in the position of a sensor, you want a set of services that need to be enacted on you, like if you're a Bluetooth sensor, location sensor. And those services can be dynamic, and they can be added together regardless of where they are located. I think that's where everything is moving to. And because of the voluminous amount of information that's produced, we just were forced into doing this from a machine learning standpoint. It's not something that we have even a choice, because each one of our little devices that sits in a branch office produces literally terabytes of interesting data, and human beings just cannot consume that. So we're forced into that.
How do you think this is going to affect the way IT departments organize and operate? In some ways, they might be automated out of jobs, but I don't think so. I think they'll get leveled up into a different kind of function.
Yeah, I think it's highly unlikely that that's all going to disappear. The prosaic stuff, of course, will disappear. The routine stuff, which over many years, Pankaj has built an enormous business on, installing, configuring, maintaining these devices. But to me, IT has just become another service. It's a set of composite services that an organization or a set of organizations will have. And that trend has been going on for a while. It's just cloud and IoT are accelerating the trend of IT becoming a composite service.
Well, historically, automation of any kind enables people to do higher value work. What's the higher value work for an IT department?
Well, it's really what is their relevance to the business. And in the business, in not just a single company standpoint, but in a combination of companies. Because everything that you do now is not just, you're not isolated at all. I mean, if it's Brooks Brothers making suits, they're so interconnected to the rest of their ecosystem. And then IT is not just your own IT. It's your IT, your supplier's IT, your customer's IT, and all of that connected together is where we see things headed today.
Okay.
I'm Pankaj Patel, and I was at Cisco for 20 plus years. So networking may be boring, but networking did good for me. So, but anyway, I retired back in October of 2016. And since I retired, I have been involved with a bunch of startups. So I am investing. I coach young CEOs and on multiple fronts, on go-to-market strategy with customers, engineering, talent, you name it. And I also collaborate with John Chambers because John and we worked together for a couple of decades, and he retired too. So he and I collaborate on investments. So we have made half a dozen or so joint investments in the young startups. And we both, and some of the startups, he's on the board, some startups I'm on board, or advisor, vice versa. So that's what we have been doing.
It's good to list them. What have you invested in?
I'm sorry?
A room like this, it's good to list them. What have you invested in?
Well, all kinds. Everything, not that much in networking, only one in networking, but there are companies in AI. It's a very exciting company. And I'll be doing a fireside chat with the CEO of the company called Spark Cognition. It's based in Austin, Texas, tomorrow at 11. So AI is a great area. Security is wonderful. IoT is another, and we are talking about IoT. And I'm very proud of one of the investment that I made, and I'm on the board of a company called IoTM. So, and Ron Victor, the CEO, will be presenting, I believe, either today or tomorrow. So these are the areas that I focus on.
Say a little bit more about security, because that's a huge growing investment area for companies. How does the cloud change things better or more challenging?
So let me bring it in reference to the IoT, because security is pretty broad, as we all know. It goes anything from endpoints that George talked about yesterday to everything at the application level, right? So, you know, when we talk about the IoT infrastructure and cloud, some of the challenges both Rajan and Sanjay talked about, you simply can't connect IoT devices straight to cloud for a variety of reasons. Number one, the protocols that a lot of these devices operate under are pretty proprietary, and they're not on IP, so there's somebody who has to do that work. But I think if you leave that aside for a second, there are many other factors to be able to connect to the cloud. And they range everything from the point of the amount of data that all these IoT devices, number one, they generate. And I think you have to pay attention to the volume of the data, the speed at which the data come to you, and the variety of the data, right? So they are very important factors. I'll just give you an example. 30 minutes of the commercial flight can generate over 10 terabytes of data in 30 minutes when it's when it's in a flight path, right? That's a lot of data, number one, and it's simply not practical or pragmatic to bring all the data to the cloud, right? Because of bandwidth issues, latency. Number two, latency is so critical because there are a lot of reasons why you would want to act on that data very close to where it's generated, right? The third is security, exactly what you asked for, which is in the entire ecosystem for the things to the cloud, you need to make sure that you are securing the perimeter of the device, and you're securing both data in transit as well as data at rest. You absolutely have to do that. And then it's all about you are going to collect data from geographically, like, you know, thousands of miles away devices and whatnot, and really bring them to what you have to really do in a very meaningful way rather. And so there are many factors which really play a role for why we need to think about the IoT infrastructure very differently when we think about the cloud. And I think this is where what Rajan was referring to is where the fog computing, and some people have actually gone further since many years ago, we came up with the idea of fog computing at Cisco, of like fog computing and the mist computing. So it's like as closer as you are, or you can say, you can take a larger envelope, but nonetheless, it's about really providing a way for some compute storage and app facility very close to where the devices are. Mm-hmm. And so you can act on them for the issues I talked about, from latency to bandwidth to anything else and also at the same time, secure what you have to do.
So that cloud becomes a critical hub, a
Absolutely.
kind of aspect inside this process of computation everywhere. If you start to conceive of it that way, then part of the analysis of a cloud exercise becomes local storage.
Correct.
Or data choice.
Absolutely.
And this other factor you're talking about in some ways is about the continued lowering of prices of a sensor.
Absolutely.
And the cheaper something becomes to collect, the more of it you collect.
Exactly. Exactly. And I think that there's one more factor, Quentin, that if I can highlight what Rajan said earlier about multi-cloud, that's going to be so critical because people have preferences, people have reasons why they are in AWS, why they are in Google, right? Because there is a special, you would be pleased on.
We love them all.
I know. But whether it's AI as their angle that they really prefer, or they want to be in Azure, or they want to be in IBM or wherever, right? So and especially when you have this Internet of Things, you might have things geographically dispersed where they are going to be connected to different clouds, from on-prem to different clouds. And so somebody to navigate through the policy-driven, how do you both optimize for bandwidth, optimize for QoS? There are so many things.
We're talking about opportunities in the management layer for
exactly,
IT,
right? So
right there.
It's huge, right? So I think it's a very exciting area. I think we are just beginning in terms of what's there to come to connect. There's a lot to do between the things to going to the cloud or to bring cloud to the things.
Now, one more question I'll put down the line. There has been a trend for many, like decades perhaps in technology, of building on what you used to build and creating these stacks which are sophisticated but kind of incoherent. This layer on that layer. Hey, spaghetti coded Cisco. It does happen. And this creates security vulnerabilities and it creates operational difficulties. With the cloud, there is an opportunity to reconceive the architecture and make it much more coherent. But the countervailing tension is so many more sensors, so many more mobility devices. Are we heading for an area where the opportunity is to build coherence, or are we going to be in an even more incoherent world?
I think a bit of both. It is almost, like I say, it's an NP-complete problem. The fact is that at one level, cloud makes things much simpler to bring out services.
Single architecture.
Single architecture. The other part of it is it also makes things to be able to be distributed, as was mentioned. You could have microservices distributed in a variety of clouds talking to each other. I have a company which is an application. One call is to the maps, the other call is to something else in some other cloud. It's a bunch of services which compose an application. So you had a question about security. So the security has to be distributed. It is no longer a firewall at the perimeter, which is going to authenticate you or allow you to come in. It has to be a distributed security.
It amounts to identity management. The firewall is around you and the role you have at that time.
Yes, exactly. So the security has to be dynamic. It has to dynamically learn.
Identity management.
It has to be everywhere. So there is an opportunity. There is also you have to simplify the fact that intelligence can be distributed anywhere, and data has to move. So data could be resident in your data center. For GDPR reasons, you cannot move the entire amount of data elsewhere. So how do you move the relevant data to the relevant application? So other area that we have been looking at is a multi-cloud data fabric to move data very easily around the place. A distributed security model that will work in this new world of things. An IoT security model where you have to authenticate a sensor. A sensor cannot respond like a human being does to authenticate itself. So how do you make sure a rogue sensor didn't get plugged in like a Stuxnet USB stick? So
now, I speak from a Google-centric perspective. That's where I am. But the idea in this camp is open source creates a kind of common standard, and that helps build a more secure multi-cloud world.
Yeah. Yes, it can, but you still have to add intelligence on top of it to manage all of that stuff. Open source is certainly a very important part of the whole trend.
Sanjay.
So you cannot get away from the protocols that things used to talk to one another. And there's complexity in those protocols because you have to have a common language for a sensor to talk to the gateway, for the gateway to talk to the cloud, for the cloud to talk to the application. You're not going to get away from that. And so there is a lot of complexity under the covers in networking. There's no doubt. But I think the challenge that we've taken on with the cloud computing is how to make things simple for the people who use networking. And I think that we've been fairly successful with now, and we've been on this trend for a few years. That simplicity comes with this set of composite services that you can add. If you can do that without it being static and configured in one particular place, then I think it does solve the problems that we've been talking about here. But under the covers, you look at anything networking, boy, it's like even to us people over here, it's gobbledygook. There's a lot of very complicated stuff that goes on under the covers. One last thing I'll say is that we talk about cloud and everything. I thought one of the most pithy things that I've heard say about the cloud is just somebody else's computer. And if you think about that, that's what it is. I mean, we talk about this cloud and highly complicated stuff. It just happens to be someone else's computer, whether it's the service provider's computer or whether it's the Brooks Brothers computer running in the cloud. It's a set of computers that someone else owns, and you're just buying a service from them.
So it's time sharing 6, 7, 8, 9.0.
Yeah, that's
with a lot more complexity.
With more complexity, yeah.
So I agree with Sanjay, and to address your earlier question, Quentin, I think you're right that the stack and the world would have to be simplified. However, I don't believe that it's going to happen anytime soon. I think it will take time. Number one, because there has been a lot of work which has gone in over the decades, especially on the industrial side, right? Because there are proprietary protocols. There are over 250 proprietary protocols, right? None of them are going to go away anytime soon. I think what you have to find is how do you coexist with that? And there are, by the way, one of the portfolio companies that Rajan has, IoT, and I mentioned earlier, this is what you have to drive to and say, you know what, how can we simplify the end user's life, right? How do we give them a single pane of glass where they can manage all of this, number one. Number two, where the password and the username are not required, no CLI change, no security policy change by the IT person and whatnot. I think that's what, and then you contain the old protocol to where so you don't have to expose and pollute your other universe that you have to while you go on slowly cleaning and simplifying the stack. But it's a journey. It takes time.
No, I think this idea of the firewall around the individual is very exciting and very interesting. It also requires an immense amount of computation.
Absolutely.
We do it for tens of thousands of employees at Google, and my God, you can't imagine how much computation is involved in this process.
Precisely. I agree.
So that's an opportunity.
Yeah.
Are you investing there?
Yes, I am. Absolutely, I am. And there are quite a few companies in the ecosystem, and actually they are coming up with different flavors. Like you mentioned about even security. I mean, some people are combining, for example, blockchain concepts to security, and then into the industrial IoT as well. So it's getting to be a pretty exciting world, actually.
That's interesting, sort of an audit trail in its own camp.
Exactly.
That's very good. We are at the clock. I'd like to thank the panelists. Anybody have a good investment idea for the crowd? Something you would love to see them?
I mentioned a couple of them, but
Go.
Well, there is, of course, I would say the best investment idea is in the fabric.
The fabric. Okay.
We are looking at everything relating to the next generation of distributed infrastructure. So we have a lot of companies that come out of our things. So
Sanjay?
AI with networking.
AI with networking.
I agree with him.
Okay. Thank you very much.
Thank you.